it to the cloud. Good evening, friends. We're delighted you can be with us. We'll be starting at 7:30 or 1 or 2 minutes afterward. We have a nice group of people in our circle this evening, so we'll give them a minute to gather.
Beth, I'll be right back. I'm not
Okay.
running away. I'll be right back.
Friends, if you are comfortable renaming yourselves, you could just add your location to your name or pronouns. Some people like to offer a land acknowledgement, proceed as led, but it is nice to know where you're zooming in from. Welcome Joyce and Becky and Edna and Jeanette and Hope and Larry and Diane. Welcome Vicki. And we see Diane is coming to us from Chattanooga Friends Meeting. Good evening, friends. Again, we're so delighted you can be with us. We'll be starting in just a minute or so. It's now 7:30 and we're expecting maybe about another 18 people. So we'll see how many friends could join us this evening, but it's a full circle and we're delighted to share this material again. Welcome, Kathleen and Sarah and Daniel. It's 7:32. Let's sort of gently begin our time together. My name is Beth Calais. I serve on the QREC Steering Circle, and Pam Ferguson and I served on the conference planning for the QREC Summer Conference. We're so delighted you can be here with us this evening. Melinda Winter Bradley originally gave this presentation to our summer conference in August, and we were so enlivened and inspired by her thoughts and her vision that we knew we wanted to give more friends an opportunity to engage with Melinda's thoughts and ideas. Melinda serves Philadelphia Yearly Meeting as their Youth Religious Life Coordinator. She serves on the Steering Circle and is one of our founding members of the Quaker Religious Education Collaborative. She's the mother of 3 children and is also one of the creators and creative forces behind the Faith and Play story collection. So without further ado, Melinda.
Thank you, Beth. It's great to see familiar faces and faces that go with names I know and some friends who are new to me. So thank you for being here this evening. It's great to be together. I am really delighted and a little honored to be asked to come back and share this again with our QREC community. To share these thoughts on kind of where we've been and what our condition is now and what the possibilities are ahead of us. So I am going to share slides, and when I do that, they're going to take up most of the screen. And I'm going to do this sort of in one big chunk as a presentation. And offer all of this at once, and then I'm really hopeful we'll have time for discussion afterward. So I will invite you that if you have a thought or a question, something you want to lift up, to put it in the chat or to jot it down. And my hope is that we'll come back to those musings and those questions for each other. There's always more wisdom in the circle, which makes me a little anxious to be one person offering a message, but we'll just start there with the message, and then we'll see what unfolds for us as a conversation together. All right, so you'd think I'd be so good at this after months and months of doing it. All right, can you see the slide? All right, Pam is nodding at me, so all right, great. And friends can feel free to, you can either minimize the people or put it in gallery or put it in speaker view, whatever works for you with seeing the slide. So I hope both that some of what I share tonight resonates with each of you from your context and your condition, and that we can affirm that there is more to be learned and shared across our differences, our regional and practical and theological diversity. That is one, for me, that is one of the strengths and one of the beautiful things about QREC, is that we walk a path together within this collaborative that brings us from many different places and many different perspectives. So we're going to do some moving both backwards and forwards and reflecting on this title of Preparation, Formation, and Belonging, New Growth from Our Religious Education Roots. And I'm sure that for many of you, much of what I'm going to offer is going to be known in some way to your experience or what you do. But perhaps there will be some new affirmation in this presentation and the discussion that we'll have afterward. I'd like to begin with this image. And at some point, Beth will put in the chat for us the attribution for this beautiful piece of art. It's a friend from, thank you, Beth. It's a friend who's a member of Wellesley Meeting. It's somebody who I met as a teenager on a Quaker youth pilgrimage and then reconnected with as adults on a visit to Wellesley Meeting. And I want to begin with this image because I think it really, to me, embodies the multi-generational Quaker community that we have been, that we are, that we can be. I was going to put this image at the end of the presentation, but I realized it really belongs at the beginning. Something that we can hold as we acknowledge that in the last 20 months, there has been worry and loss and exhaustion and some trauma. But this is an image of, for me, all of us together. I love the phrase all together now. And to me, that's what this image says, with the light between us and among us. So let's just take a moment here. We didn't begin with worship, so why don't we just take a moment just to rest together in this image. We so often assign the future to our children when in fact they are right here, part of the present. And so we are at a moment in this present where our earth is in peril and our children's future along with it. And I believe that in some parts of the world, including here in the United States, the Religious Society of Friends is at a crossroads. This is a moment, I think, to reach down into our roots for strength and grounding, and then to reach out to each other for what has always been and is still possible. This slide looks like, oh my gosh, what a boring place to begin. We're going to start with Faith and Practice from Philadelphia Yearly Meeting. But last spring, it's our habit to read queries at the beginning of worship once a month. And last spring, the monthly query reading were these queries about religious education in the home and meeting. So since that's my work, I paid some attention to the queries that month as I was preparing them for one of the young people in our meeting, to read them for everyone. And I just want to take a moment to look at these together. And I'm not going to read them out loud. Friends can just take a moment to read them for themselves. And as I looked at them and explored them, I wondered, what guidance do these queries offer me for the work I do with the children and young people in our meeting, for my work for Philadelphia Yearly Meeting, my wider ministry, and for the friends who, the joy of my work is collaborating with others about how we're supporting children and youth and families in our meetings. So I wondered, what guidance do these offer? And I think that the experiences of these pandemic months are really valuable lessons that might help shape programs and support for young friends and families in our meetings. The disruption and interruption of the pandemic, we've experienced, have called on our imagination, our creativity, resilience, and love. So where do we go next? And I distilled these queries a little bit, thinking about how they ask us to place in the center. What do they ask us to place in the center of religious education programs? What's kind of at the heart of these queries? And what jumped out at me was preparation, formation, and belonging as the through lines through those queries. They seem pretty straightforward in a way, and they may resonate in whole or in parts with things you are already doing in your meetings and churches. So these were what my simplified version of them were when I was trying to figure out, what did they say to me? That we are called to do preparation for worship in our community, preparation to live a life consistent with the principles and testimonies of our Quaker faith, It says, and I know many of us pick and choose and maybe don't do all of these in a religious ed program in our meeting, but formative learning that includes the biblical tradition, the life and teachings of Jesus, other religious traditions, Quaker history, our practices. I didn't specifically name the testimonies there, but as well, part of those. And then experiential learning that engages and supports Quaker identity and a knowing of belonging among friends for young people. So then I thought, well, where does this all come from? Where does this idea of preparation, formation, and belonging, how is it connected to our past? Somebody had been cleaning out an office and found this copy of the Friends Intelligencer. It sounds like something that they have like in a Harry Potter movie, like newspaper. And they said, would you like this? This looks like something you might like. So it is actually a treasure trove of wisdom from 1955 and Friends. And this was one of two earlier publications. There was the Friends Intelligencer, which was a Hicksite publication between the mid-1800s and mid-1900s that merged with the Friend, which was the Orthodox publication that existed again about the same time, or early 1800s to 1955. And the 1955 merger of the two publications coincided with, it was the reconciliation of Hicksite and Orthodox Friends in Philadelphia. And the two came together to become what we know as the Friends Journal, as Friends Journal today. So this issue, what is religious education for all? And the headlines cracked me up. I was like, these could be a QREC newsletter today, or conversation circle topics, or conference workshops at the QREC annual conference. The Bible and Friends Today, Internationalism and the Adult First Aid Class, Pioneering in First Day Schools, Learning Through Music. And the one that I really delved into was by a friend named E. Vesta Haynes, The Meetings Opportunity, Religious Education for All. And in her piece, she writes about what is religious education. And there's this wonderful quote over here that I'm going to actually have to quickly just do this to minimize my people on my screen. Sorry, friends. There. So what is religious education? To many, it has come to mean helping our girls and boys during the first day school period. This is indeed an important aspect of religious education and must be part of the process, but an increasing number of persons are becoming concerned about a deeper and much broader point of view. Education as a whole is no longer thought of as dealing only with childhood and youth, but is recognized as an ongoing process for the youngest and the oldest. Learning is continuous, whether gained from books, life experience, and environment, or from all life's contacts. Howard Thurman calls it our growing edge and says we must consider this edge of prime importance in our total development as persons. So I was really taken with this quote, and it just connects so much to QREC and our mission to look at lifelong spiritual formation, and made me wonder about the broader implications of, across ages, our religious education and formation. She goes on to speak in her article about the importance of experiential religious education in the home, that what happens in the home cannot be overestimated. She lifts up support for parents and families, connections between generations in a meeting, talks about home visits. And she also says, and this is a quote, parents need help in developing their own spiritual lives. And this makes me think about the incredible section that exists on the QREC website, the Faith at Home section of the website. It makes me think of other important work that is happening today among friends. The Quaker Parenting Initiative, and I know Harriet Heath is here this evening, the convener of QPI, and the Quaker Parent Mutual Support Groups that are happening this winter that stretch across the globe and are being sponsored by New York Yearly Meeting, FUM, and Philadelphia Yearly Meeting. So she was naming that, and we are trying to do that support in some places among our RE community and people who support parents. So, pausing in this past here, I'd like to lift up something about first day school. And I won't get up on my soapbox about why I would like us to use a different name than first day school. You can just wonder about my rebellion there, and I can tell you another time. But the idea of first day school, of Sunday school, really only goes back into like the mid 1800s. I've seen 1858 as a date for Quakers in the United States. That the idea rose that provision should be made for instructing Quaker children in the principles of our religious society. What had been experiential and grounded in all ages worship became education that happened outside worship in classrooms and through a school model. And this is part of a larger theological and community history for us as Friends. But I think it's important to note that this idea of attending to children's religious education in separate spaces was new. Jane Johnson established at Green Street Meeting House in Philadelphia what she called a first day school. That's the first reference we can find to it in the 1800s. And the years that followed included another new development alongside, of course, they needed curricula and content. And that creation of religious education curricula and content was scaffolded by ages. So from what I've read and what is shared in the Friends Intelligencer, there was a lot of experimenting in this time. All of this should sound familiar to us, I think. There was a lot of experimenting, asking friends who were running the schools what they needed. There was frequently no budget for projects. The work was all voluntary labor outside the work that people were doing in other parts of their lives. And along with the kind of familiarity of those experiences, we really do see some of the roots of our QREC community today in the history. So this 1955 publication includes a section called Friends Here and Abroad. And there's a wonderful section on first day schools in action with reports on what's going on in different places that somebody had pulled together from across the United States. And so there's one is called Experiment with Teenagers in Bucks County and New First Day School in Orlando, Florida. So it's kind of neat to see different things getting held up. But Vesta Haynes also in 1955 calls for the whole meeting to support religious education committees, and for the whole meeting to support teacher training. She talks about preparing people for this important contribution to the future of our religious society, how to support the people who carry this ministry, who do this work, who work with young people. And she describes the need for close cooperation between, and her language is interesting, the meeting and the school, by which she means the first day school, in fostering and developing worship, quite specifically. This is another quote from her. These endeavors require careful planning so that the children feel wanted and a part of the meeting for worship. Their presence should be accepted as natural and normal with no sentimentality. That the meeting for worship is basic and necessary can be appreciated by children. So I lift this up, and I know we're lingering on this slide for a few minutes, but I just want to lift up the idea that things have not always been as they are now, that there have been shifts along the way, of course, as friends have changed, as meetings have changed, our communities. My least favorite phrase in English is, that's the way we've always done it. And in this case, it's really not true. Children were more often with the body in worship. I'm sure my children are not the only ones who, when read a book about Obadiah Starbuck on Nantucket, were like, man, he had to sit through the whole thing. That's one representation. But because of needs in different times, children moved into spaces that provided them with religious education as young friends, rather than being in the body for worship. And I really appreciate Friend Vesta's words about children being part of the body in worship. And someone who I know would agree is Elise Boulding, another friend. So I'd like to bring Elise Boulding kind of into our circle here. I think she would have been very excited about QREC and our community. And as implied in the title, New Growth from RE Roots, we all carry both the past and the present and the future within us, and so do our organizations. We hear themes that are related to QREC today in that 1955 publication, and again in Boulding's writing, which is closer to us. Boulding was sometimes called and referred to as a futurist, and she gave a lecture to Australia Yearly Meeting in 1996 entitled Our Children, Our Partners, a New Vision for Social Action in the 21st Century. In her work, Boulding frequently warns about the separation of children and adults and about underestimating young people. This quote is kind of, it really illustrates that our society has a powerful tradition and witness to equality of persons, respect for the seed of God in everyone, and for the capacities within each person. This means that in this age of increasing age segregation, Friends have a special calling to re-involve children and youth, not only in the ongoing work of the Society of Friends, but of the larger society of which we and they are a part. There were teenagers in that first Quaker band known as the Valiant 60, and no generation since then has lacked gifted teenage ministers, as I read our history. And I suspect that many of us could bring to mind young people, youth, teenagers who have given witness in our lives, in our meeting communities. So when she spoke at Australia Yearly Meeting in the late 1990s, Boulding began her address with the observation that it was because Australian Friends and what they shared at a 1994 FWCC triennial. At that triennial, a minute was adopted among our global world family of friends that shared Friends' yearning for our Quaker world family to be more inclusive of children. But she also notes that the minute then focused on all the impracticalities of doing this. So I suspect that is probably familiar to some of you as well. It sounds like a great idea, including children more, but is it really practical? How would it work? And Boulding goes on to say, in churches and Friends meetings, we strive to replicate age grading in the name of quality religious education. The problem is that the practice has been carried to an extreme, leaving very few common social spaces in which child-adult friendships can develop. And she urges friends, ask the children in your meeting who their adult friends are and what they do together. Some meetings make a point of encouraging this, but many Quaker children have never had a serious conversation with an adult who was not a relative, a teacher, or someone having special responsibility for children. So she provides us with a lot of food for thought. Now I'm going to reach back even further into the past. We see the start of this age segregation in the name of religious education, really importance among Friends in the mid-19th century. And again, it's important to, I think, note, it too was about preparation and formation and belonging. That quote, provision should be made for instructing Quaker children in the principles of our religious society, preparation, formation, and belonging. But following on the vision of Vesta Haynes and Elise Boulding, and thinking about there are yearly meetings today, and perhaps some local meetings as well, who are giving time and energy to rethinking what membership means in our time today, I think we're at another moment of shift. And the Great Reversal is described in the work of Diana Butler Bass, an American historian of Christianity and advocate of progressive Christianity. I think it's helpful in understanding a little more about where we've been and where we might go. And I want to lift up that it was Beth Kalea who introduced me to this. And it was one of those moments where my mind was blown and so many things came together. So with thanks to Beth. Diana Butler Bass describes that right now we sort of exist in a place of thinking that you need to believe and then you learn how to behave, and then you belong in a faith community. So someone should figure out that Quakerism is the thing that they believe in, and then they join us and they learn how to do the practices and the things we do, worship as we do, and they will then feel a sense of belonging. But Diana Butler Bass says that that is not how it's always been. And that long ago, our faith was a matter of community first, practices second, and belief as a result of the first two. And that it really was around the time of this mid 1800s that our immediate ancestors reversed the order. And she was thinking, in fact, in part about this creation of Sunday schools in the 19th century, the idea that you needed to be educated on what to believe. And she goes on to talk about how it's up to us to restore what was an original order, that the teacher of was Jesus. That because Jesus did not begin with questions of belief, instead Jesus's public ministry began when he formed a community. That people, a group of people who belonged with each other, to each other. And she goes on to talk about the early community that followed Jesus was a community of practice. That's a phrase we use a lot in QREC, being a community of practice. That Jesus's followers did not sit around and listen to lectures on Christian theology. They listened to stories that taught them how to act toward one another, what to do in the world, healing, hospitality, prayer, challenging traditional practices, comforting the grieving. And by doing things together, they began to see things differently. They began to see a new way. So in the biblical pattern of faith, in these stories, believing is what follows. Experience leads to belief. Belong, behave, and believe. Butler Bass says the great reversal is returning back to a beloved and beloving community, a way of life practiced in the world, a profound trust in God, mercy, and justice. And I would suggest that in those roots and in the Gospels, we find children belonging. In Mark chapter 9, verses 36 to 37, Jesus takes a little child whom he places among them. He takes a child in his arms and he says to them, "Whoever welcomes one of these little children in my name welcomes me, and whoever welcomes me does not welcome me, but the one who sent me." So imagine saying this to an adult newcomer in your meeting or church. Maybe not these exact words, but imagine what I'm about to say as being the energy and the spirit with which you greet a newcomer. We welcome you with all of your idiosyncrasies and distractions, with your questions and your confusion, with your gifts and your talents, with your faith we so desperately need. We welcome you. Now imagine saying that to a child. Imagine saying to a child in your meeting or church community, "We welcome you with all of your idiosyncrasies and distractions, with your questions and your confusion, with your gifts and your talents, with your childlike faith we so desperately need. We welcome you." It has to be in our hearts, and it has to be the desire of our religious society. So we've gone way back and a little further, not back, and kind of dug into some of the roots where we've come from in some of our parts of our tradition. A teacher who welcomed children in community, communities who in earnest created schools so that their young people could be educated in the ways of their community, this idea of age-graded religious education, and voices in the not-so-distant past asking us to return to multi-generational spiritual community. So where do we go now? I've chosen the image of a labyrinth here. I really love labyrinths. Partly, they are not a maze. They are not a puzzle. There is no decision making. They are a path forward that you can put your feet on and you are present to the journey. It twists and it turns. Sometimes it moves us away from the center, the place we want to get to, and sometimes it moves us closer to that center. But if we continue on, we do reach that destination. So here are some things that I think our path ahead might include um, as we think about where we might want to be going. Um, and much of this is really, I think it'll be clear, it's really based on the experience of the pandemic in the last 20 months. So I would offer that rest and reconnection are important in returning and rebuilding community and healing together. That planning for our programming and spiritual formation in our meetings that centers why may reveal and reshape how. If we stop and ask why we do things the way we do, why we are doing a practice, why we have programs, it might ask, cause us to think about, stop and think and reshape how we're doing them. Asking parents for their comfort levels with how we're coming back together in person, online, hybrid, really trying to center the needs of families. Creating synchronous and asynchronous programming that supports flexibility and inclusion. I know there are conversations happening about, who was not included before and who might not be included if we go back to the way we have done things in the past, if we don't do something that is inclusive of thinking about all the needs that we have now identified and learned more about, perhaps through the pandemic. And that worshiping with all ages together nurtures generational connection and religious identity. I adapted from the work of Tracy Smith, and she's the person who writes the Faithful Families books. I created a tool for planning going into the fall. I call this fall the fall that's not what we thought it would be. And I offered this as just sort of practical planning as part of my work with Friends in Philadelphia yearly meeting that included these questions to consider. I'm not sure now, with some hindsight, this needs only to be a pandemic era list of questions. Perhaps it's really for us going into any period of thinking about what we want to be doing. So thinking about where has the light been in the past and the present? Where do we find energy and light in what we're doing? What do we know for the coming season? That could be any kind of season ahead of us, any period of time. What are our guiding lights? Again, the why. Why do we offer religious education? What is at the center or the heart of that, no matter what we're doing or how we're doing it? Is it about community? Is it about preparing children for in some way? Why, and what is at the center? And what can we reuse or release? Right now is a really good time to release things that we haven't done in a while that we realize we don't need. And what has been really useful that we're like, let's come back to that again. And the last one is new growth. So if we were to dream big and grow a new tree of some kind, to do that dreaming, but then to be aware of how much energy we have and and maybe there's a sapling to plant first. This summer, I recognized that for me, the tree was, I would love to have Wednesday evening every week, pizza and a story and half an hour of worship together. That's sort of my big dream for my meeting and our families and young people. And I realized it wasn't going to happen this summer. And so instead, we had a popsicle party. And we bought popsicles and got together and hung out with our masks on and distanced a little outside. And I did not realize how many popsicles the children in my meeting could eat in one evening. It was some kind of new record. But it was great. We came together, and I realized that's what had been important and what I was envisioning was the being together. So dreaming, but then being realistic. And this is an actual resource that can be shared. That is, I hate to use the word worksheet, but it gives these questions in a way that the idea is that a religious education committee could use them to do visioning and brainstorming together and planning together. So again, this has, at least for me and maybe for others of you, it's certainly what I read and hear about often from people who are doing children and youth ministry among friends and other denominations in the United States. This has been kind of not quite the fall we thought it would be. I know going into in the summer, the Delta variant hadn't happened yet. There was a sense that things might be a little bit more back to normal. And I also realized that among all of us who are here this evening, we may be in different places in terms of being back together again at our meetings or churches. So I want to make room for this is not monolith. But since I first shared this talk in August, the fall happened, and I've heard a lot of people mourning children and families not returning, at least not as much or not in the same numbers. And I came across something by a man named Brian Wallace, a Presbyterian minister in Pittsburgh, who shared some thoughts about this question and this concern and momentum. And the title of his YouTube video, which I'd be glad to share that link in the chat later, was Where Are All the Kids? And perhaps some of you are, again, back in community in different ways, but I have been feeling this recently, and I know others who have too. Where are the kids? So Wallace reminds us that, obviously there's the truth that some families are just not comfortable yet coming back together. Perhaps vaccinations for children will help support people in feeling more comfortable, but that we need to make space. That's one of the first things to recognize, is making space for what families need and what is going to feel comfortable for them in this time. But he also speaks then about momentum, and that things that have momentum are hard to stop quickly. And that for some of us who pivoted online in the spring of 2020 in March, our momentum helped to carry us into those online spaces. But children and youth ministry in many places has taken a real hit to its momentum. And while we were all, everyone and every kind of ministry was impacted by the disruption to our routines with gathering and worship, it has in fact been a bigger deal for children and youth because of how much of their lives this has been. So if I'm a 6-year-old child this fall, more than 25% of my life has been during the pandemic. If I'm 14, I have a 14-year-old son, a 9th grader, more than 10% of his lifetime has been impacted by the pandemic. And if I look at like kindergarten to now, the last 20% of that 9th grader's remembered meeting experience has been disrupted, which would be like for a 40-year-old, the last 5 years of your life being disrupted by COVID. Just ratio wise. So like imagine that much of a chunk of time having been disrupted, and how much bigger a time it is for our children. And if I'm a parent of a 4-year-old right now, half that child's life and our family's life has been with them, has been in the pandemic. And if we were people who attended meeting or church prior to the pandemic, that happened for a couple years, and now we've had 2 years of disruption. So almost 2 years can make a world of difference in terms of children and their development. I was a middle school teacher for a lot of years, and one of the things we learned was that the middle school years, that early adolescence, is the time of the greatest growth and change, next to or second to the first year of a child's life, infancy up to their first birthday. So if you were a 6th grader in March of 2020, you're now in the fall of your 8th grade year. I can tell you, people know 8th graders are very different people than 6th graders. So all of this is about this impact on them and the slowing of momentum. We've lost momentum in being together in community. So he makes a case for patience, that it's going to take time for us to be back in a place where we felt like we were. He says in the video, and it's a little depressing, 3 to 5, maybe 7 years before we really see an ease in some places, not everywhere, for children and youth ministries, and that we need to continue to be flexible, that this is a time to innovate, explore new ways and shapes. And I love he ends by saying, God is more concerned about where we're going than where we've been. So another case for looking to where we want to go in this time. Someone I know who's a mountain bike rider says that when you're riding a mountain bike, you don't look down, but you look ahead at where you want to go. So looking at where we might want to go and bringing back in preparation, formation, and belonging. What new growth might come from our roots? Where might we consider ways to better align our religious education planning with those queries from Philadelphia Yearly Meetings, Faith and Practice? So among other things, I think that the queries are encouraging us, friends, to rethink that scholastic model of first day school and lessons, and to model support at home and at meeting or church and in our yearly meetings for all ages spiritual community of lifelong spiritual formation and learning. So some shifts that I'm suggesting are on this slide. So going from age-based groups to multi-generational meeting for learning. It doesn't mean every week, but maybe there's some of both that happens in our meetings. To go from thinking about this as being instruction and a lesson to experiential learning and practicing. I know some of the most wonderful QREC conversations in conversation circles and other spaces have been about ways that people are trying to do experiential learning, giving our young people opportunities to practice. Perhaps moving from 1 hour on Sunday, or 45 minutes, to be honest, what most of us have if we're doing children's programming, to new times in the week. Asynchronous programming, as said before, online. What can be happening at home? There were some great things that we tried when we were really unable entirely to be together during the pandemic. I'm not sure that we should release all of them. Things like sharing things for home for people to do and then come back together and share with each other. So, how do we look on our schedules and calendars beyond the way we've always done it, in ways that will make things more possible for families perhaps to participate in? And thinking about going from children being in worship for only a few minutes of the time to, again, not every week perhaps like Obadiah, but having all ages community worship regularly as part of what we do as a meeting community. I will admit I was a Friends school educator for about 20 years. And not just because of that experience, but my children's own education. Children in Friends schools, most of whom are not Quaker kids, are going to meeting for worship at school for 20, 30, 40 minutes a week. And I think we really are not making enough space for our children. There are, of course, the practicalities of if they're going to have a program, there's only 15 minutes left for them to come back. There are lots of ways to approach that. And that's one of those places where I think about, where do we want to go? What do we want to look like? How can we be creative and make more room for our children to be with us in worship? If we go back to Boulding and Haynes and their wisdom, they root us again in this importance of generational sharing and generational that leads to belonging. Boulding talks about overlapping life cycles, overlapping generations that as we move through the decades of our lives, we're part of. She says we keep gaining new insight, new skill, new understanding of the many aspects of the task of peace building, sharing with and learning from older and younger people who are older and younger than we are, and still added in the last years, months, and days of our lives. So the wisdom of circles of different ages sharing with each other. And Haynes says it is only, she really goes all the way out here. She says it is only as all learn together and work together and worship together that the meeting is truly functioning. So it's not about putting one age or generation above another or in front of another. It's not about trading the comfort of adults in worship and what they need from worship for the, trading that for the needs of our children. It's about all of us being connected and finding ways in intergenerational community that everyone's needs are being met and that everyone is of equal importance and value in our larger circle of meeting life. Vesta Haynes also says in his association with the First Day School group, as in the home, the child should have some knowledge of his own worth, a sense of belonging, a challenge to do their share, and a realization that here too God is present. So this is then kind of thinking about some of the resources we have and the work ahead. And in addition to our young people feeling that sense of belonging in our community, belonging within what they have to give, the work that we might do together, calling our young people into the work that is ahead of us. This is in some places a way, it might be new growth, and in other places I know there are wonderful things that are happening and being tried and being done. There are wonderful examples in our QREC community of people, including and giving young people an opportunity to lead in some of these areas of witness. So these are just some of these are linked, and I can provide a PDF of the slides. In Philadelphia Yearly Meeting in particular, for us, these are three. There, of course, are other big ones, but climate change, addressing racism and becoming anti-racist, and this question of Quaker identity and belonging are all places where there are really wonderful resources for us to tap into. If we're talking about climate change in our meeting, isn't that perhaps an opportunity for our program for young people to be also looking at climate change, and then for there to be intersecting points between adult witness and what the young people are working on, opportunities to work together on things. Same is true for addressing racism and these other areas of witness. So a call for us to really not just call our young people into the work, but to find ways for this to be intergenerational. And part of that is because Jesus did not put children out of the circle. To feed 5,000 people, he uses the gifts of a little child in John 6. To demonstrate how to be great in God's kingdom, he points to a child in the Gospel of Matthew. To explain how to enter the kingdom of heaven, he says we must be more like a child in Luke. So in our roots, our children are really present to us, and we are present to them. And when we consider the work and witness ahead of us, this one direction is to weave together the programs for adults and children and youth, even if only by topic or theme. Thinking about this slide again. There's great authenticity in the connections that we make between all of our different approaches to the witness. We will be preparing our young people for the world, forming them as part of a community of believers and doers, and their belonging will be both seen and felt. So in 1996, this is a quote from Elise Boulding, 2026, which she hearkened to being 30 years out, is now only 5 years from us. But I love her way that she looks at imagination. Imagination is the key word here. Friends have some serious visioning work to do. To begin, let us take a little time right now to step into 2026, 35 years from now, in our imagination. So we might look even further ahead. It is our vision of the future that helps set our priorities, guides our action in the present. So what is our vision? What can we imagine? What plans do we have that give us hope and a future as a religious society of friends for all ages? We can reach down into our roots for strength and grounding, and then we can reach for what has always been and is still possible. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Melinda. Friends, do you have questions you'd like to ask of Melinda or bring into our circle in general? Well, I can start with one and just place a kind of fanciful hope that I'm having. Our meeting has a sanctuary ministry, and we're working on renovating a sanctuary apartment on the basement level. And I would love to create a Quaker Meeting House dollhouse so that the children can sort of act out life as a friend and think about welcoming a family into the basement apartment or having a vigil out on the street edge to sort of witness to the community. I hope our children know enough about being a friend, about living a friend's life, that they could emulate that and pretend and practice that in their play as a child. So I looked online for old, Quaker Meeting House dollhouses, and I think there were some, but from like the late 1800s, maybe at the end of the Sunday, when Sunday school sort of first started. And then it wasn't something you played with anymore. It was too formal and something you had to learn. So I want to see our kids go back to learning the life of a friend by playing.
I wanted to just comment that I had a hopeful thing to add. In our meeting, we asked, we sent out an email and called some of the parents to ask about a Christmas program this year. We had done something last year on Zoom, and we thought it might be fun to do it again this year. We did a play on Zoom last year, and they did enjoy that, but we've lost 3 children. We've lost several children to moving. Just that's the way it is. They went to some other meeting, and those meetings have gained really good things. But the response that we got is that they didn't really want to do that again. They didn't want that kind of a party, and of course we can't get together and celebrate in the meeting house. But they would like to do the caroling that we've done, which is possible to do outside of the nursing homes that we go to. And we also are going to try and include some of our friends who haven't been able to get to meeting. And I thought that was a really good thing that these 11-year-olds who've been doing this since they're about 5 or something like that every year, caroling, except last year, wanted to do that rather than something else. So I'm going to mute now because I have to go to work on the other meeting.
Thank you, Liz.
I guess one of the things that tonight has opened my eyes to think about things a little bit differently. We are in a very small meeting, and when I say very small, most people don't get small enough in their minds. So that at this time, we don't actually have any children, nor have we actually had children for a while. But I remember when we did, and I still dream of time that we did and hope we will again. So I came tonight just thinking about children, and I hadn't been thinking about it in the broader way, which, Melinda, thank you, because religious education is not just for children. Silly me. Interestingly enough, the pandemic has we are doing a lot more religious education in the pandemic because we lost meeting for worship in person. We started doing a whole lot of stuff online with Zoom, and we connected with a lot of Quakers across the United States doing cool stuff on Zoom. So it's really changed our look and demographic about who we are and how we connect with one another. Because at any given meeting for worship, it's a very big meeting for us if 8 people are there. That's a very large meeting for worship. But yet routinely on our Zoom book clubs or our worship sharing, whatever, we have more than that. Because many of our members drive so far to get to meeting, and they never stayed because they had a long drive home. So I think that's one of the things I'm hoping as we think about and embrace the future, both for children and adults, is there are some hard things about this pandemic that will grieve us and traumatize us forever. But there are also some things that we've learned that will take us forward. And I think those are really, really important. I'm hoping also, that was more of a comment. I'd love it if either of you have anything to say about small meetings and religious education, particularly for children. I'd also like to know, it's sort of a chicken and the egg thing. How do you get them? I mean, I love going to meetings, and I'm one of those people whose worship is enriched by little children noises, whether it's a baby's coo or mommy, when is this going to be over, kind of thing. But I also have met many friends over the years who find that very, very irritating. So, I'd be interested to hear your all's comments.
I guess I should not admit that I have very little patience for the latter. It's probably easy to tell that I don't have as much patience for people being bothered by that. Partly because I feel like, well, like we're kind of at a moment here. Like we could grow or we could die, and I think a little tolerance is in order. So, sorry, I'll dial it back down. I think that I get this question frequently in terms of people who sometimes will get, someone will reach out to me and say, we don't have any children currently. We'd like to be ready. If children come, what should we have ready? Like, what should we have? And I really think, and it may feel counterintuitive, but maybe not after having heard the presentation, I really think you already have what you need, which is worship. And that, children coming into a new space with their parents are going to be pretty hesitant to separate from their parents and go with someone who they don't know. There are wonderful things, of course, that you can have, a kind of a lesson or something to do in a bag, having things that are ready. But I would really encourage to make your meeting room a place where parents know that they are welcome and their children are welcome. We did a project at my meeting, which somehow we finished during the pandemic, of creating a more accessibility, putting in a ramp, putting in, making it more accessible for people who roll into the meeting house. And it was interesting because the person who had been really the key volunteer who had gotten this big project done, it involved, ripping apart and redoing a porch and all kinds of really big things. At one point approached me then and said, I wonder about creating a space in the meeting room for children. I was like, what? And this is a friend who did not raise children themselves and hadn't been involved with the children in the meeting, but said to me, I feel like, and we stood in the back of the meeting room and envisioned this corner and envisioned and so what we did was we moved one of the benches up a little. We put down a rug to kind of create the space. We put a rocking chair, which someone sat in last week who just had hip replacement surgery. They were really glad for the rocking chair. We put in a rocking chair and a little table. I mean, it was very simple, a couple big pillows and, the wonderful kids are welcome here thing that Beth Kalea made years ago and some crayons. And I'm going to get emotional. We stood there after we had done it and he looked at it and he said to me, Melinda, people are going to walk into our meeting house and they're going to look over there and they're going to know that children are welcome here. And if no one ever even uses it, it'll be worth it that we did it.
Mm-hmm.
And, it is in Godly Play, we talk about the unspoken messages of spaces. There are many unspoken messages in a Quaker meeting house about what we value, what is important to us. I mean, in some ways, in a Quaker meeting house, what's not there is telling you the messages of what's at the core of our faith. But having a very simple little space says to a family, it says to visitors walking in, a little basket of books, like, you are truly welcome here. And being prepared for them to join you. So thinking about your original question, being prepared for them to join you in meeting is maybe, I think, the place to begin. Joyce has had her hand up for quite some time. Joyce, go ahead. Thank you for being patient. Thank you.
I'm a member of Morningside meeting in New York City. And the thing that really struck me was when you were talking about the old way of focusing on community first and belonging first. And as a good example, most of our people from around the world are meeting online, and sometimes 8 or 9 are meeting in Riverside Church. But when we do the breakout rooms, we're not inviting people to get to know each other or to get to know us. We're inviting them to come with their questions about Quakerism, and we'll answer them. And I think one of the last comments had to do with, well, you were describing welcoming parents and welcoming children, but I think really focusing on experiential education and, our little educational things are usually lectures with no conversation. It's all worship sharing. And I think we need to just turn it upside down and ask the question, what can we do to be welcoming to adults as well as children?
Thank you, Joyce. Joyce, everyone's gonna forgive me for a minute while I tell you that my daughter is a student at Barnard and had been hired to do the children's program at Morningside before the pandemic started. So still hoping she's gonna connect in with you all at some point. So a little New York Yearly Meeting connection there. Yeah, I'll tell the funny story. One time we had a whole bunch of newcomers in our meeting. We had a number of new attenders and families were among them. And we very carefully planned a newcomers gathering, and all the committees of the meeting prepared things to share about who they were as a committee and what it would mean to join our committee. And we're going to tell you about our meeting. And we got pizza, and the babysitter stayed after worship, and the kids were all happily, eating lunch and playing. And we began our gathering. And I said, why don't we go around and there are about 40 people in the room. Why don't we go around and have everyone share, who you are and like what brought you to Westchester meeting? Like what has brought you here on your spiritual path? Well, you won't be surprised that like an hour and change later, we were finally getting all the way around the circle. And, those like committee descriptions, we handed them out as a handout later. Like they were not what was important. What was important, kind of to Joyce's point, was we needed to get to know each other better. The babysitter's like in the doorway giving me this high sign, like, please, these children are losing it. It's been longer than you said it would be. But it was a lesson. It was a really big lesson to me that our work was to get to know each other better and to make space for us to share about our spiritual journeys more than it was for us to, indoctrinate them in the ways of our meeting and our committees. So Joyce, yeah. Mari, I see your hand.
Hi, I'm joining you from Silo, North Carolina, from the Silo Friends meeting. Melinda, I have been at your Godly Play that you had at the Penland was at Pendle Hill,
Mhm.
and that was wonderful. And I was struck by what you talked about when you said first build the community, and then you said something the second, and the third was the belief that follows, and as a result of what to do. And was that the second one? Was I wish I
Yeah,
had listened.
belong, behave, believe. So be in the
Oh,
community, learn the
belong.
practices. Yeah, yeah.
Okay, and that really, really made sense to me. That makes sense. That you won't first start talking about the belief, and you so this other conversation, what you were just talking about, just that we need to get to know each other. And so when pandemic was happening towards the beginning, we were always going for outdoor walk, just friends will get together. We did it every other week, and children were so excited. That there was something for them, and we had good participation. They were just excited to see each other and in presence of each other. Um, and I think I'm kind of, I have to, I'm sitting with it still with a question, but somehow we stopped doing it. And I know there was one week when we were walking. I knew this child from preschool that he went through since he was first 1 year old through 4 years old. But he got upset with a sibling that was walking with him, and he just took off and, went. And I know that I can say that he had good sense of, where he is. He was close to his cousin's home, and he knows about the road and the cars. And but I think somehow it made another adult who was going on a walk with me very uncomfortable. And maybe that I didn't want to do anything uncomfortable to other adults. But I think what we were really needing more is more time together, and for children to get to know each other and get you know, re-enter and be with each other. And I'm still kind of feeling like it was unfortunate that we kind of stopped the walk.
Mhm, mhm,
Um,
mhm.
yeah, so mm,
Thanks, Mari.
it's
It's
kind
nice
of,
to see you
yeah,
again. I do remember
nice
your
to
name.
see
It's
you.
nice to see you again.
Yeah.
I saw Jeffrey's hand, and I also saw Cameron's had a hand up. Jeff, do you want to go first, and then Cameron?
Hi, my name's Jeff Bishop from Yardley Friends Meeting, Yardley, Pennsylvania. Um, I'm still involved with the Children's Education Program. What we had started with our program, again, community is a big part of getting to know everybody in the meeting house. What we had done is our meeting runs from 10 to 11, meeting for worship. So we would have the youngsters come in into the meeting room from 10 to about 10:15 and sit with us, and just to let them experience what the meeting was about. And then they would go into first day school, and then we would stop at 10:55, just before 11, and they would come back into the meeting house, because many times the words of wisdom come out in the last 5 minutes of meeting for worship. I don't know if that happens to a lot of other people, but after meeting for worship, we have and now we have afterthoughts, which is important. And some of the kids have spoken up and saying, we had a thought at our meeting for first day school, and they would like to share it. So that was an opening thing. Then we have anybody we would like to hold the light. And then we go around and we introduce ourselves to everybody in the meeting. And having the children sitting in there, they eventually, well, they are exposed to the adult members of the meeting house, which I thought was a good remedy for event building for community. However, since the pandemic, we have lost that. And they are not joining us in Zoom, just the parents are. So that is really frustrating to us. On this past Sunday, we decorated the tree in the meeting house, and we didn't have any children. We always used to have children. We used to sing Christmas carols and things like that.
Mhm.
It is extremely tough right now for everybody. And I just, every night I try to hold the world in a light to bring us back to where we were. And again, it's been extremely tough. I lost my wife this year, and it's just been a very tough year. But again, with the support of my meeting, I'm working through things. But that's kind of how we did the first day school, which I thought was kind of unique, the way we did it. We included them in the beginning of the meeting, and we included them in the end of the meeting, kind of like an Oreo cookie. We had the filling in between of the adults. So that was kind of how we did it. I don't know. I'm sorry I was so late, but I was talking to a friend from Buckingham Friends meeting at length. I thought it was going to be a quick conversation, but it turned out to be a little bit longer than normal.
It's all right. We're glad you were here, Jeffrey. Thank you.
Yeah.
It's all right. Thank you. Thanks for what you shared. Thank you. Cameron, you're here? Yes.
Yes, I'm here, and I have two little ones in bed next to me. So you might hear some chit-chatting of little Quakers here. So what really helped me, I'm hearing a lot of people are struggling with coming back to meeting. And I even struggled with that with my little ones. I have a 4-year-old with a heart condition, so I was very scared to come back. And what really helped is we had a family picnic. And the family picnic, we were able to bring our own food that we only shared with our own family. And once we came back to sit down, I mean, I just felt the memories, and we felt so comfortable coming back. And now we're coming back on the weekends, and it's mostly outside. We're really connecting with nature. Our meeting has different teachers and different FAPs. We never have the same teacher all the time. It's always changing up. We ask for volunteers of different committees, and that kind of helps, change it up a bit. But what really does help too is the understanding that the kids can be crazy. My kids were running back and forth on the meeting house porch because we are not feeling comfortable going inside the meeting house yet. So they're running back and forth on the porch, of course, disturbing everybody. But as everybody said, that people kind of enjoy the little chaos. But we also have a little playroom, which is really helpful. That it tends to be just the little guys that play in there, so I feel comfortable to take them. And just having those little places to take the kids, and I know it's comfortable, it's been really helpful.
I'll share, Cameron, you made me think of something that we tried this fall. It was sort of an evolving thing. We thought we would try something like Friendly Eights, but I think Friendly Eights, and someone can correct me if I'm wrong, but I think Friendly Eights is kind of a when 4 couples would get together kind of thing. Like, I, as a parent of 3 little children, never experienced it as really like exactly. And it was, my kids would be like, why is it us and like 2 other people? So we decided to like kind of jettison the 8 part and just call them friendly gathering groups. And we made them bigger, and we made them really intentionally multi-generational. So a family or 2, some other, like, families with children, families without children, couples, singles, that kind of thing. And we decided that rather than do an adult religious education program for the fall, we're going to read a Pendle Hill pamphlet and talk about it. And that we would instead do, we would encourage people to have friendly gatherings, and we would provide some really kind of some light programming, that we would provide suggestions of what to do together, ranging from something to do with the young people involved, and intergenerational, to watching a Quaker Speak video and discussing it to something more biblically oriented, decide what your group wants to do. We got to August and realized people were not going to organize themselves to do this. It was just too hard. We were all really exhausted. The fall was more scary than we thought it would be. So, kind of to Cameron's point about a family picnic kind of thing, we said, fine, we'll just host 3 in-person gatherings that we will lightly program with what we had planned, but for everyone to come together, and we provided the food. And it was great. It really was our example of people coming back together in the fall, because we could be outside in September and October. We hung in there and we were outside in November. It was a really cold night. The pizza got cold really fast. But it was, I think people felt a sense of being taken care of and cared for too. There was a sense that that we, having food is always helpful. And we were able to do that with people helping. Cameron's point about, having people bring their own is also another way that can be much more comfortable for some folks. But my point is more that we just kept pivoting and scaling back. We started off being like, these groups will meet. Then we were like, no, they're not. And then we were like, we will just organize the gatherings. And that ended up being what enabled us to come together, again, across ages, in that way.
Let me just speak on this Friday. We are having a games night. This is the first time we've done this in years since the pandemic. So this Friday we're having a games night, and the kids are getting very involved with that. So it's kind of a break the ice type of thing and bring them back into meetings, just having a games night. And so
Great. It's a great idea. Well, I'm going to admit that I hope that these have been great examples. I'm so glad friends shared both questions and also things that you're doing, things that you have been trying, things that have been working, and that have helped support your meeting, and children and families and young people and everyone in the meeting. I do hope you feel a little challenged by some of the things I said tonight. It's kind of one of my goals, is that you felt a little bit challenged. Challenged to think about, the scholastic model that has not been the way it's always been. Challenged to think about how to make space for children in worship. Challenged to think about how we might begin with belonging and find our way into community by creating that radical kind of hospitality, and that sense of there's a place for you here. It's as we continue in our different situations and our different conditions to deal with the pandemic and the ways in which it's impacting community. I think there's both a level of exhaustion that some people are feeling, and also there's such opportunity here to think about things in new ways, to try things in new ways. And another encouragement I would give you is to think about how I think we sometimes can be quite siloed in our meetings in terms of committees and whose job is what. In my meeting, there are a couple of us who serve on kind of the adult RE, the Worship and Spiritual Growth Committee, and the Youth RE Committee. And so when we decide to do things like community worship, it's both of those committees together making that kind of a decision. Places where a fellowship committee can help support the food for the gatherings. Places where committees can support each other. I really would urge anyone on a youth RE committee to have your pastoral care committee check in with you all a couple times a year, especially if you're not in worship because you're with the children. How are you? How is your spiritual condition? That's a really nice pairing, is to have them check in with you about how you are as well. So I think there are ways we can keep reaching across our different kind of ways that we're serving the meeting to be then serving both each other and the whole community together.
Liz, do you have a question?
Yeah, I'd like to know, I'd like people to know where this will be posted, because it occurs to me that I may want to use this with my meeting. To, the first part where you talk, or even the whole thing. And so I know that's going to happen. I just want to make sure other people know that.
I believe it will be on the conference page of the QREC website. We had pre-conference workshops and then some repeat workshops, and some recording of workshops that occurred at the time. So if you look on the QREC website, I think there's a banner that kind of circulates. And when you see the one about the conference, it opens to a treasure trove of resources, recordings. It's marvelous. So there was such an upwelling of richness and creative thought last summer that we just thought, let's really savor it and make sure to share it around and give people some second helpings. So thank you so much for coming tonight. Are there any last questions? Otherwise, maybe we're ready for a little closing worship. Does that feel about right? All right. Let's settle into a few minutes of prayer together, friends. Thank you, friends. And thank you, Melinda. Take good care and enjoy your Advent journey.
Thank you, Melinda. Thank you so much.
Thanks for being here. Thank you for having me back again.
Thank you.
And thank you, Pam, for tech hosting.
Yes, good job, Pam.
No problem. I would be very interested in the YouTube video of where the kids are. If you could just stick that in your presentation for a link. I looked for it and couldn't find it. So
Yeah, you know what? I do have that link, and I can. Do you want me, Beth, to share the slides from tonight, right? Would you like me to do that? That's something.
Could you
I
do
said I
that?
would. Yeah.
That
that
would
would be great.
That would be great. Your presentation has evolved.
Yeah,
So
it
Yeah,
was.
I took out one thing and put another one in. So yeah, I'm happy to do that.
love, time, and patience. We always need more of that.
Yeah,
That was the one, yeah, because when I watched this guy, he's a reverend. He's like part of the like Pittsburgh Presbytery or something that it really it was really I thought it was sort of, I mean, I was reading a lot of things, running around in ecumenical circles, reading a lot of things about, the fall and how the fall was going for people. And, there are articles out there that say things like, serve the people who are there at this point. Like, you can't make yourself, too upset about who's not. I mean, but I thought his YouTube, relatively short YouTube video, was both really smart and really I mean, sobering. I mean, I really hope it's not 7 years, but it was
Well,
also
Hard
encouraging
job.
to think about why, why, I
Mm.
mean,
but I think that 7-year thing is an important thing, because when the lockdown happened, we all thought, oh, 2 weeks we'll be back to normal.
Yeah.
And now it's been 2 years, and we need to take the long-term view of the changes that have happened in our society. And so I think 7 years is a good thing for us to start looking at.
Yeah. Yeah, that
Hmm.
idea of like looking where do you want to go,
Right.
and thinking about it being preparing for that, preparing for being like what what's it going to be like in 2023, 2024, like that looking where you want to get to. Yeah,
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
agree.
Yeah. So yeah, I would really like that link. And
Yeah.
your presentation was even better this time than it was back in August. So thank you.
Well, God bless. Who was our wonderful translator in August?
Yeah.
Was it Anton?
It was Anton.
Anton,
I mean,
yeah.
God bless Anton, who was like, okay, Melinda, we got to slow it down to a sentence at a time. I mean, it was, I appreciate you all inviting me to do it again. I mean, that was an inclusive opportunity, but
But it
was
felt
hard-
more together tonight.
Of
And
course it
because
did,
of that,
yeah.
because we were hearing it all together. So
Yeah.
that helped.
yeah,
That helped.
yeah. No, I
Yeah.
appreciate that
Yeah.
part. Great. All right. Well, I
Thank
will,
Thank you all.
yeah.
If you send me the slides and the link to the YouTube, maybe I could go back into the Zoom and send it to everyone who registered.
Oh,
Does
perfect.
that make
Okay.
sense?
Oh, that's interesting. Yeah.
Perfect.
Yeah.
Perfect.
Okay. Oh, well, thank you both. Thank you. And thank you, Jeffrey.
Yeah.
Nice to have you in the circle. And, I hope your next few months are gentle with you.
It's a good way to say that.
Thank you.
Thank you all.
Good night, friends. Thank you.
Good
All right,
night.
take care. Take care. Good night.